9 years ago, she disappeared without a word. Today, he returns, not as her former lover, but as the tycoon who once dominated the entire east coast of America. Every morning, he silently walks into her small bakery, orders a black coffee, and leaves without a word. But the child behind the counter, those eyes, he'd seen them in the mirror before. What truth has been buried for 9 years? Follow my story to the end, and don't forget to like and leave a comment with the city you're in so I know how far this story has progressed. The smell of burnt sugar woke Clara Whitmore before her alarm did. It always did. 4:11 in the morning, the ovens already ticking as they heated, and she lay there in the dark counting her own breaths like she was still afraid someone might be counting them for her. She got up because the bread didn't make itself. Harbor Ridge slept under a low gray sky, the kind that never quite committed to rain. Clara pulled on the same flour-stained apron she'd worn for 6 years, tied her hair back hard enough to feel it pull at her scalp, and let the pain ground her the way it always did. Pain was honest. Pain didn't lie to you about who you used to be. Downstairs in the kitchen, the mixer groaned awake. She measured flour with hands that didn't shake anymore, not like they used to, not like that first year when she'd had to grip the counter just to keep herself upright. Now her hands were steady, calloused. Someone else's hands, maybe. A baker's hands. Nothing like the soft fingers that used to trace the lapel of a $3,000 suit like it was nothing. She didn't let herself think about that. Except she did, every morning, for the 4 seconds between cracking an egg and reaching for the next one. In the back room behind a curtain stitched from an old tablecloth, Noah was still asleep on the cot she'd set up for him 3 years ago, after the nights at the hospital had become more familiar than the nights at home. He was 7. Too thin. His chest, when he breathed, made a sound like a door that needed oil. A faint catch, a stutter, gone if you weren't listening hard enough to catch it. She always listened hard enough. "Hey, baby boy." She crouched by the cot and Noah cracked one eye open, looked at her like he was deciding whether the day was worth it yet. "Bread won't bake itself." "You say that every day." "Because it's true every day." He smiled. That crooked little smile he had, the one that hit her somewhere under the ribs every single time, because it wasn't her smile. It was someone else's. She'd spent years trying not to see it, and years failing. By 5:40, the first trays were in the oven, and the bell over the door was silent. The street outside empty except for a delivery truck idling 2 blocks down and a stray cat working its way along the gutter. Clara liked this hour. The world hadn't started lying to anyone yet. At 5:58, the door opened. She didn't need to look up. She knew the weight of his step on the old floorboards, knew it the way you know a scar by touch, even in the dark. 3 years he'd been coming. 3 years of the same order, the same 11 words, the same silence that filled the space where conversation should have been. "Morning," he said. Dominic Valente didn't look like a man who used to own half a state's worth of fear. He looked like money, clean lines, a charcoal coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, haircut close and exact. But Clara had learned, over 3 years of watching him over the register, that the suit was a costume. The real man lived underneath it, folded down small, watching everything with eyes that never quite settled. "The usual?" she said, not looking up from the dough. "The usual." She made his coffee, black, no sugar, the kind of order that told you nothing about a person except that they didn't want to be known. She set the almond pastry on a plate without being asked anymore. She'd stopped asking 2 years back, and slid both across the counter. His fingers brushed hers when he took the coffee. It happened every morning. Neither of them ever mentioned it. "Cold out," he said. "It's October." "Right." That was it. That was the entire conversation. Same as every morning, and every morning Clara told herself she didn't care. And every morning some small traitor part of her chest tightened anyway. Because 9 years ago this man had known every secret she'd ever had, and now he ordered coffee from her like she was a stranger behind a counter. Which, as far as he knew, she was. He sat at the corner table, always the corner, always the seat facing the door, and unfolded a newspaper he never seemed to read. She watched him from the corner of her eye while she worked the next batch of dough, watched the way his gaze kept drifting toward the back room, toward the curtain, toward the sound of small feet that hadn't started moving yet. He knew. She was almost sure he knew. The way his jaw tightened whenever Noah's cough rattled through the kitchen, the way his hand had stilled on his cup 3 weeks ago when Noah had run out front in his pajamas, asking for orange juice, Dominic had looked at that boy like he'd seen a ghost. Clara had built a wall around the truth 9 years ago, brick by brick, lie by lie, and she was not about to watch it come down over a cup of coffee. By the time the morning rush hit, nurses coming off shift, a few regulars, a contractor crew that bought out half her cinnamon rolls, Dominic was gone, like he always was, slipping out the door sometime around 6:30 without a goodbye. Clara didn't watch him go. She made herself not watch him go. It was a discipline, like kneading dough exactly 9 times, like never crying where Noah could see. 3 miles across town, in an office on the top floor of a glass building that bore his name in brushed steel letters, Dominic Valente stood at the window with his tie already loosened and his knuckles white around a tumbler of water he had no intention of drinking. His assistant Marcus knocked twice before letting himself in, a habit from the old days when knocking once could get a man killed if Dominic didn't recognize the rhythm. "You went again," Marcus said. "Not a question." "I go every morning." "You used to go to a bakery for coffee. Now you go to torture yourself for 40 seconds and walk out looking like you've seen a body." Marcus dropped a folder on the desk. "Speaking of which," Dominic turned. "What?" "The medical records request you put in. Hospital wouldn't release anything, not even with the foundation letterhead, not even with the donation history, said the file's sealed." "Sealed how?" "Sealed like somebody with real money told them to seal it." Marcus's voice had dropped, the careful tone he used when he was about to say something Dominic didn't want to hear. "I had Reyes pull what he could from a contact inside billing. Whatever's wrong with that kid, it's not just a heart condition. There's flags on the file. Genetic consult requests denied 3 times. A specialist note that got redacted before it ever made the chart." Dominic set the glass down slow, like sudden movement might shatter something in the room that wasn't made of glass at all. "Redacted by who?" "That's the thing." Marcus slid a single printed page across the desk, a name circled in red ink. "Records show a legal hold filed under a shell entity. We traced the shell 3 layers deep before it went cold. But the name that keeps surfacing in the paper trail, the same name that shows up adjacent to 2 other sealed pediatric files in that same hospital system over the last 9 years. Say it." "The hollow circle." The name landed in the room like a dropped glass, and for a second neither man moved. Dominic had heard that name exactly twice in his life. Once, 9 years ago, whispered by a man who died 3 hours later in a parking garage with Dominic's hand still shaking from what he'd had to do to get the information. And once again 4 years ago, in a wiretap transcript he'd burned the same night he read it, because some things you don't keep around even as evidence. Some things you keep around as a wound you check on, privately, alone. "That's not possible," he said. "That organization went dark. I made sure of it." "You made sure of what you could see." Marcus's jaw was tight. "Dominic, I think you need to look at the boy's birth certificate." "I've seen it." "Have you seen the original, or have you seen the one on file?" Dominic didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence answered for him, the same way his hands had started answering for him 9 years ago, curling into fists before his mind had even caught up to the fear underneath the anger. He picked up the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a hospital intake form. Official, government-stamped, Noah's name typed clean across the top. "Father, unknown." He'd seen that line 100 times in his head since the first morning he'd watched that boy run through the bakery with a head of dark, unruly hair and a way of tilting his chin when he was thinking that Dominic recognized because he saw it in mirrors every day of his life. Father, unknown. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie the way he knew his own pulse, but knowing wasn't proof, and proof was the only thing that mattered in the world Dominic used to run, the only currency that could survive a courtroom or a bullet or 9 years of careful, deliberate erasure. "Find out who filed the legal hold," he said quietly. "Find out who's been paying to keep that file sealed, and find out—" His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough that Marcus looked up sharp, because in 15 years of working for this man, Marcus had heard that voice break exactly once before, the night Clara disappeared. "Find out if anyone's been watching her, watching them. I want eyes on that bakery around the clock, but discreet. She doesn't see a single car twice. You think she's in danger? I think, Dominic said, looking out at the gray sky over a city he'd spent 9 years rebuilding into something that looked legitimate, that somebody spent a great deal of effort making sure I never found out I had a son. People don't do that for no reason. People do that because the truth is worth killing over. That night, after the bakery closed and Noah was finally asleep, his breathing thin but steady, Clara sat at the small kitchen table upstairs with a shoebox open in front of her. She didn't open it often, maybe twice a year, usually on nights when the cold made her chest ache with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite regret, but lived somewhere in between. Inside the box, a photograph, edges soft from handling. A younger Dominic, laughing, actually laughing, not the careful half-smile he wore now, with his arm around a younger Clara, on a pier somewhere she could no longer name. A hospital bracelet, faded, Noah's birth date printed on it in ink gone the color of weak tea, and a letter she had never sent folded into quarters, the paper gone soft as cloth. She'd written it the week after she found out she was pregnant, before everything happened. Before the men who came to her apartment with a folder full of forged documents and photographs that weren't real, and a voice that told her, very calmly, that Dominic Valente already had another woman, another family, that he'd paid for an arrangement to be made, that she should disappear quietly if she ever wanted to see her child grow up safe. She had believed them. God help her, she had believed every word, because grief makes people stupid, and fear makes people obedient. And she had been 23 years old and terrified and alone with a heartbeat inside her that wasn't hers alone anymore. She unfolded the letter now for the first time in 3 years and read words she'd written in handwriting she barely recognized as her own. I don't know how to tell you this without you doing something reckless. I'm scared of what you'll do. I'm scared of who you are when you're protecting something. But I need you to know the letter ended there. She'd never finished it. 3 days later, the men came back, and Clara Whitmore vanished from her own life so thoroughly that even Dominic Valente, a man who could find anything, anyone, for the right price, had spent the next 6 years coming up empty. She folded the letter back along its creases and put it in the box. Downstairs, faint through the floorboards, she heard the bell over the shop door. Strange, this late, the door should have been locked. And her whole body went cold before her mind even caught up to why. She moved fast, instinct older than 9 years of careful peace, snatching the kitchen knife off the block before she'd consciously decided to. She crept to the top of the stairs. A shape moved through the dark of the shop below. Tall, quiet, methodical in a way that made her stomach drop because amateurs didn't move like that. Amateurs made noise. Amateurs hesitated. This person moved like they'd done this before, like they were searching for something specific and knew exactly where to look. She heard the back room curtain rustle. Noah's room. Every ounce of fear in her body converted instantly into something with claws. Get away from him, she said, voice low and steady even as her hands shook, knife raised, moving down the stairs 2 at a time. Get away from my son right now, or I swear to God I will. The shape turned. A flashlight beam swung up and caught her face for half a second before swinging away, and in that half second she saw enough. The build, the stillness, the way the figure's free hand had already gone to something at their hip, to know this wasn't a burglar looking for a cash register. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice was male, flat, professional in the worst possible way. We're not here to hurt anyone. We just need the boy to come with us for a routine. Like hell he is. She was at the bottom of the stairs now, knife out in front of her, putting herself between the curtain and the stranger with a ferocity that surprised even her. I don't know who sent you, but you tell them Clara Whitmore doesn't negotiate, and if you take one more step toward that curtain, I will put this knife through something you'll need a hospital for. A second shape stepped out from behind the pastry case. She hadn't even seen the second one, hadn't heard him, and that fact alone told her how badly outmatched she was. Easier if you just hand him over, the second voice said. We've got a car outside. Nobody needs to get hurt tonight. Behind the curtain, Noah's voice rose, small and frightened and half asleep. Mom? Everything in Clara narrowed down to that single syllable. She didn't think. She moved. Knife first, body second, a sound tearing out of her throat that didn't belong to the woman who made croissants every morning, that belonged instead to something older and more desperate, something that had been waiting 9 years for exactly this moment to wake up. The first man caught her wrist before the blade connected, twisting hard enough that she cried out, the knife clattering across the tile floor and spinning into the dark. He shoved her back against the pastry case with enough force to crack the glass, and through the white starburst of pain across her shoulder blades, she heard the curtain rip back, heard Noah scream her name, heard the second man's footsteps moving fast toward the sound. No! Clara lunged again, no weapon now, just hands and teeth and rage, clawing at the first man's jacket as he dragged her sideways, and somewhere in the chaos the front door of the bakery exploded inward with a force that threw glass across the floor like rain. A third shape filled the doorway, bigger, faster, already moving before the glass had finished falling. Clara, pinned against the broken case with blood running warm down her arm, looked up in time to see Dominic Valente cross the room in 3 strides and put the first man's head through the wall hard enough to crack the plaster, his face a thing she had never seen before in 3 years of quiet coffee orders and folded newspapers. No calculation in it now, nothing careful, nothing controlled. Just 9 years of something terrible finally let off its leash. "Where is he?" Dominic said. Voice dropped into a register that didn't belong to a CEO, didn't belong to any man who wore suits and read newspapers in corner seats. "Where is my son?" And from the back room, past the torn curtain, past the second man now frozen in the doorway, with Noah's small wrist caught in his grip and a gun rising toward the only family Clara Whitmore had left in the world, came a sound that stopped every heart in the room at once. The sharp, unmistakable click of a safety being released. The click of the safety hung in the air like a held breath, and for 1 full second nobody in that ruined bakery moved at all. Then Dominic moved. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need one, not anymore. Not after what his body remembered from years he'd tried to bury under boardrooms and tailored suits. He crossed the distance between himself and the second man in a blur of controlled violence, one hand clamping down on the gun arm and wrenching it skyward at the exact moment the trigger gave, the shot tearing a hole through the ceiling tile in an explosion of plaster dust and noise that left Noah screaming and Clara's ears ringing. The man with the gun was good. Dominic was better and angrier, and that combination ended things fast. 3 strikes, brutal and economical, the kind of violence that didn't waste a single motion, and the man crumpled against the counter with blood already filling his mouth. "Noah." Clara was moving before the body hit the floor, blood still streaking down her forearm, where the glass had opened her up, sweeping her son into her arms with a desperation that shook through both of them. Noah was sobbing, not the soft cry of a scared kid, but something rawer, something that came from a place kids shouldn't have to find inside themselves. "I've got you, baby. I've got you. Look at me. Just look at me. Mom, the man, he had a... I know. He's not going to hurt you. Nobody's going to hurt you." Dominic stood over the unconscious bodies, chest heaving, hands still curled into fists that hadn't gotten the message that the fight was over. He looked at his own knuckles like they belonged to a stranger, looked at the blood on them, some his, most not, and something in his face cracked open in a way Clara had never once seen in 3 years of silent coffee orders. Then he looked at Noah. Really looked, for the first time without a counter and a register and the careful distance of customer and shopkeeper between them. The boy's face streaked with tears, his dark hair a wild mess, his chin, that same stubborn tilt, pressed into his mother's shoulder. "He's mine," Dominic said. Not a question. A confession, torn out of him like it cost him something physical to say it. Clara's head snapped up. "Don't! Clara! Don't you dare do this right now!" Her voice cracked down the middle, fury and terror braided together so tight you couldn't separate them. "My son just had a gun pointed at him. 2 men broke into my home, and you want to stand there and thought they came for him because of who his father is." Dominic's voice had gone low, dangerous, but it wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at himself. At 9 years of not knowing, at every morning he'd sat in that corner seat telling himself he was imagining the resemblance. "You think this is a coincidence? You think 2 professionals break into a bakery in the middle of the night for cash in the register?" I think you need to leave. Like hell I'm leaving. This is my house. Clara stood, Noah still gripped against her hip, even though he was getting too big to carry like that, even though her arms were shaking with the effort and the adrenaline crash that was starting to hit her knees. You don't get to walk in here after 9 years and start making decisions about my son. Our son. The word landed between them like a slap. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Outside, somewhere down the block, a dog had started barking at the gunshot, and in the distance, a siren was beginning to wind up, faint but climbing. Somebody had called it in, the explosion of the door or the gunfire or both. You don't get to say that, Clara said finally. Quiet now, quieter than the rage had been, and somehow that was worse. You don't get to come into my bakery for 3 years, drink your coffee, say 11 words to me every single morning like I'm a stranger, and then the one night somebody tries to hurt him, you suddenly want to claim him like he's something you own. I didn't know. You knew enough to watch him. I saw the way you looked at him. Every single time he came out front, every single time he laughed too loud or tripped over his own feet, I saw your face, Dominic. You knew. I suspected. There's a difference between suspecting and knowing, and you of all people should understand that difference because you're the one who made sure I never got to know for certain. Clara flinched like she'd been struck. That's not fair. Isn't it? His voice rose now, the careful control finally splitting at the seams, 9 years of grief curdling into something uglier and more honest. You disappeared. No note. No call. 6 years I had people looking for you. 6 years, Clara. I spent more money trying to find you than most men make in a lifetime, and you were 3 miles from my office the whole time, baking bread. You think I wanted this? Her voice broke entirely now. The dam she'd built brick by brick for 9 years finally giving way all at once, right there in the wreckage of her own shop, with her son crying against her shoulder and 2 unconscious men bleeding on her floor. You think I chose this? They came to me, Dominic, men in suits, just like the men lying right there, and they told me you'd already moved on, that there was another arrangement, another family, that you'd paid to have it handled. That's a lie. I know that now. Tears were streaming freely now, cutting clean lines through the flour dust still on her cheeks from a morning that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I didn't know it then. I was 23 and pregnant and terrified. And they showed me documents, Dominic, real documents, hospital letterhead, your signature on things I'd never even heard of. And I believed it because believing it was easier than believing the alternative, which was that the most powerful man I'd ever known couldn't protect either one of us. The siren outside was close now, red and blue light starting to wash across the broken front window in slow pulses. Dominic crossed the room in 2 strides and crouched, putting himself at eye level with both of them, his face inches from Clara's, close enough that she could see exactly how much he'd aged in 9 years around the eyes, exactly how much of that polished CEO mask had been built to cover something that had never actually healed. I would have torn this city apart for you, he said, quiet now. Quiet and furious and broken all at once. I would have torn it apart for him before I even knew he existed. You took that choice away from me. I was protecting him. You were protecting yourself from having to trust me. The accusation hung there, ugly and true enough to hurt, and Clara didn't have an answer for it because some small cruel part of her knew he wasn't entirely wrong. Knew that the men who'd come to her apartment 9 years ago had only succeeded because some scared, exhausted part of her had been looking for a reason to run before Dominic's world swallowed her whole the way it eventually swallowed everyone who got close to him. Noah, sensing the tension without understanding the words, pressed himself harder into his mother's side. Mom, I want to go home. We're not safe here, Dominic said, standing abruptly. His voice shifting gears so fast it was almost violent, the father stripped away and the strategist snapping back into place like armor. Either of you. Not after tonight. Whoever sent these 2 will send more, and they'll send them smarter. And what? I'm just supposed to trust you? Hand my son over to a man I haven't had a real conversation with in 9 years? You're supposed to survive the night. He was already moving, crouching to check the pulse of the man slumped against the counter. The same brutal efficiency he'd used to put the man down now turned toward something almost clinical. Still alive. Good. Alive meant answers. The police are going to be here in 90 seconds, and when they run these two through the system, they're going to come back as nobody. No priors, no records, ghosts, which means whoever's funding this has the kind of reach that makes police reports disappear before they're even filed. How do you know that? Because I used to be the kind of man who could make that happen. He looked up at her, and there was no apology in his face, just fact, flat and ugly and necessary. I'm not anymore, but I know exactly what it looks like when somebody else still is. The Harbor Ridge police arrived to find a bakery with a shattered front window, two unconscious men with professional-grade restraints already zip-tied around their wrists. Dominic's doing, fast and practiced in a way that made the responding officers exchange a glance. And a woman who gave a statement so controlled, so carefully worded, that the younger officer taking notes couldn't quite shake the feeling she'd given statements like this before. Dominic stood off to the side during the questioning, Noah's small hand wrapped tight in his. A fact Clara noticed, and didn't have the energy left to argue about, not at 11:40 at night with glass still glittering on the tile and her whole carefully constructed life lying in pieces around her feet. Mr. Valente. The lead detective, a heavy-set man named Harlan, with tired eyes and a notepad he barely glanced at, approached with the kind of careful respect Dominic recognized instantly. The respect of a man who knew exactly whose name was on 3 buildings downtown and didn't want to be the cop who made an enemy of it. We'll need a full statement, and we'll want to know why 2 men with what looks like military-grade tactical training decided to hit a bakery. I'd like to know that myself, Detective. You have any enemies, Mr. Valente? Business rivals? Anybody who might want to send a message? Dominic's eyes flicked just briefly to Clara, to Noah. I have a complicated history. I'll cooperate fully with your investigation. And the woman, the boy, are under my protection as of tonight. Clara's head turned sharply at that, but she said nothing. Not in front of the officer, not with Noah's hand still locked in Dominic's, and her own legs still shaking too hard to argue effectively about anything. By 1 in the morning, the ambulance had come and gone. Clara's arm stitched up in 9 careful sutures, refusing the offer of a hospital bed, refusing everything except the chance to get Noah somewhere that wasn't a crime scene. The police had taken the 2 unconscious men into custody, photographed the broken glass and the bullet hole in the ceiling, and left with promises of follow-up that Dominic already knew, from years of experience, would lead nowhere. By 2, they were in a car Clara didn't recognize, driven by a man Dominic introduced only as Reyes, heading toward an address she also didn't recognize, and somewhere around the 3rd unfamiliar turn she finally broke the silence that had stretched taut between them since the bakery. Where are we going? Somewhere secure. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now that's safe to give in a moving car. Dominic's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the side mirrors with a frequency that told her this wasn't paranoia, this was procedure. Something drilled so deep into him it had survived 9 years of boardrooms and charity galas without ever fully going dormant. I don't know who's listening. I don't know who's tracking this vehicle. Until I do, you get general directions, and you get to be angry about it. I am angry about it. I know. Noah had finally fallen asleep against her side somewhere around the 2nd turn, exhaustion winning out over fear the way it only could in children, his small chest rising and falling with that faint catch she'd learned to listen for in her sleep. Clara looked down at him now, in the passing streetlight, then up at Dominic's profile in the front seat, hard-edged and unreadable in the dark. Tell me about the hollow circle, she said. His shoulders went rigid. Where did you hear that name? You said it. Back at the bakery, before the police got there. You were talking to the man on the phone, the one you called right after it happened. You said it twice. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Clara thought he might not answer at all. It's an organization, he said finally. Old money, older grudges, people who've spent decades making sure the wrong children never grow up to inherit the wrong fortunes, the wrong secrets, the wrong loyalties. 9 years ago, I crossed them without knowing it. Got too close to something they were protecting, made too much noise in the wrong rooms. I thought I'd buried that conflict. I thought it ended when... He stopped. When what? When you disappeared. His knuckles had gone white on the wheel. I always assumed it was my enemies who got to you. I never once considered that the people who took you from me and the people I'd been hunting for 9 years might be the same organization. That's a mistake I am never going to make again." Clara stared at the back of his head, something cold settling into her stomach that had nothing to do with the night air leaking through the cracked window. "You're saying they planned this years ago, not just tonight. I'm saying somebody spent considerable resources making sure you believed I'd abandoned you. Forged documents don't write themselves, Clara. Hospital letterhead doesn't fall into the hands of random criminals. Whoever did that to you had access, medical access, legal access, the kind of access that takes years to build and a fortune to maintain." "Why?" Her voice had dropped to something almost childlike, stripped of the fury, just raw and exhausted and afraid. "Why would anyone go to that much trouble over us? We weren't anybody important. I was a grad student. You were... I was the only man on the East Coast who could have rebuilt a criminal empire from nothing inside of 5 years if I'd had a reason to." His eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, and for the first time that night she saw something underneath the fury and the control, something that looked almost like fear. "A son is a reason, Clara. The single greatest reason a man like I used to be could ever have. They didn't separate us because of who I was 9 years ago. They separated us because of who I'd become if I ever found out about him." The car went quiet after that. The only sound, the hum of tires on wet asphalt and Noah's faint, uneven breathing. And Clara found herself doing something she hadn't let herself do in 9 years, looking at Dominic Valente and wondering, with a kind of sick vertigo, how much of the last decade of her life had been a story written by someone else's hand entirely. The house Reyes finally pulled into wasn't a house so much as a fortress dressed up to look like one. High walls disguised as garden hedges, cameras tucked into ornamental lighting, a gate that required 3 separate clearances before it would open. Clara carried Noah inside, still sleeping, laid him down in a guest room with sheets too expensive for a kid who usually slept on a cot behind a curtain, and stood in the doorway watching him breathe for a long, silent minute before she finally let herself collapse into the chair beside the bed. Dominic found her there an hour later, 2 glasses of something amber in his hands, setting one down on the nightstand beside her without a word. "I don't want it," she said. "Take it anyway. You've earned it." She didn't touch the glass. "I need to know everything, not the careful version, not the version where you decide what I can handle. Everything." Dominic sat down across from her, the low lamp throwing half his face into shadow, and for a long moment he simply looked at his son. Really looked, the way a starving man looks at food he's been told for years doesn't exist. "His heart condition," he said slowly. Marcus pulled what records he could. There were redacted specialist notes, genetic consult requests, denied 3 separate times before they ever made it onto his chart. Genetic consult for what? "I don't know yet, but I know congenital heart defects don't usually come with that kind of paper trail, Clara. Somebody's been managing his case from the outside for years, steering his treatment, keeping certain tests from ever happening." The amber liquid in her untouched glass caught the lamplight, trembling faintly because her hands, resting on the chair's armrests, had started to shake again. "You're saying somebody's been controlling what doctors my son sees for 7 years, while I had no idea. I'm saying I think the people who took you from me never actually stopped watching either one of you. I think Noah's condition might not be entirely natural, and I think the only way to find out for certain is to get our hands on records nobody currently alive is willing to give us." "Where would we even start?" Dominic's jaw set, the lamp throwing the old hardness back into his face, the version of him that Clara had glimpsed exactly once before tonight. Back at the bakery, 3 strikes, and a man crumpling against the counter, 9 years of careful civility burned away in under 4 seconds. "There's a private research facility 2 hours north of here," he said. "Decommissioned officially. Still active, according to 2 separate sources who owe me favors they'd rather not collect on. It's owned through 6 shell companies, and every single one of those companies eventually traces back to a single trust." He looked at her, and something in his expression made the back of Clara's neck go cold before he even said the name. "A trust administered by someone I used to trust with my life. Someone close enough to both of us 9 years ago that they could have orchestrated everything. The forged documents, the sealed records, all of it. Without either one of us ever suspecting a thing." Clara's stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Who?" The lamp flickered once, some fault in the old wiring, and in the half-second of darkness Dominic's voice came low and certain and devastating. The name came out of him like a confession dragged across broken glass, and Clara watched something in Dominic's face she'd never seen before. Not in 3 years of corner table silence, not even back in the bakery with blood on his knuckles. This was something closer to grief than rage, the particular devastation of a man realizing he'd been carrying a knife in his coat pocket for 9 years and never once felt the blade pressed against his own back. "Who's Vivian Calloway?" "She was my attorney. Before that, she was my mother's attorney." His voice had gone flat, the careful affect of a man building a wall in real time, brick by brick, to keep something from collapsing through. "She handled the trust that funded my expansion when I was 26 years old. She handled the paperwork the night you disappeared, Clara. The missing person filing, the private investigators, all of it ran through her office because I trusted her with everything. I trusted her with you." Clara's glass, untouched until now, trembled hard enough that amber liquid slopped over the rim and onto her wrist. She didn't notice. "You're telling me the woman who helped you search for me is the same person who made sure you'd never find me?" "I'm telling you I don't know yet. I'm telling you her name is on a trust that owns a research facility I have every reason to believe is connected to whatever's been done to our son, and I have spent 9 years calling that woman family." He stood up so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor, and Clara saw his hands curl into fists again, the same fist that had put a man's head through plaster 3 hours earlier. "I need air. Dominic, I need air, Clara." He was gone before she could say anything else, the door to the guest room clicking shut with a control that felt more dangerous than if he'd slammed it. Marcus found him 40 minutes later on the back terrace, staring out at a dark tree line with a phone in his hand that he hadn't used yet, like dialing the number might make the betrayal real in a way it wasn't yet. "You should sleep," Marcus said. "I should call her." "And say what?" "Hey, Vivian, quick question. Did you spend the last 9 years helping erase my son from existence?" Marcus leaned against the railing, his own face drawn tight with exhaustion. "You go in hot. She has time to bury whatever's left to find. You want answers. You do this the way you used to do everything that mattered. Quiet, patient. Let her think she's still safe." Dominic's jaw worked. "I trusted her with the company when my father died. I trusted her to handle the worst year of my life and never once questioned a single decision she made." "I know." She sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me Clara had probably just gotten cold feet. Told me, Marcus. Looked me in the eye for 6 years and told me to let it go, that some people just run, that I needed to focus on rebuilding instead of chasing a ghost. "I know. If she did this," his voice cracked clean down the middle, the first real fracture Marcus had heard in him in 9 years of careful, controlled fury. "If she's the reason I missed 7 years of my son's life, the reason Clara spent 9 years thinking I abandoned her, I am going to take apart everything that woman has ever built with my bare hands, and I am not going to feel a single thing while I do it." Marcus didn't argue. He'd worked for Dominic Valente long enough to know that promise wasn't rhetoric. It was a forecast. They moved on Vivian Calloway 2 days later, after Reyes had quietly confirmed what Marcus's contact inside the hospital system had only hinted at, that the trust funding the decommissioned research facility wasn't just administered by Calloway. It was named for her. Calloway Premier Holdings, buried 4 shells deep, but unmistakably hers. Clara insisted on coming. "You don't need to be there," Dominic told her in the car, the same careful tone he'd used the night of the bakery, the tone that made her want to put her fist through something. "He's my son, too. I don't get left in a guest room while you go play detective." "This isn't playing, Clara. This is the woman who might have spent 7 years deciding which doctors my son was allowed to see." "I'm aware. That's exactly why I'm coming." Vivian Calloway's office occupied the top floor of a building 2 blocks from Dominic's own, all glass and pale wood, and the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. She rose from behind her desk when they walked in, 60-something, silver hair cut sharp at the jaw, reading glasses pushed up into it like a crown, and her face did something complicated when she saw Clara standing beside Dominic. Surprise. And underneath it, buried so fast Clara almost missed it, something that looked unmistakably like fear. Dominic, and this must be... Vivian's composure snapped back into place with practiced speed. Goodness. After all these years... Cut it, Dominic said. I want to talk about Callaway Premier Holdings. Something flickered behind the older woman's eyes, gone in an instant, replaced by the smooth concern of a woman who'd spent 4 decades in rooms full of men trying to catch her in something. I'm not sure I follow. A research facility, 2 hours north, decommissioned on paper, active in practice, 6 shells deep, but it traces back to a trust with your name on it. Dominic set both hands flat on her desk and leaned in, close enough that Vivian had to fight not to lean back. I want to know what's happening inside that building, and I want to know why a legal hold filed under one of your shell entities has kept my son's medical files sealed for 7 years. The silence that followed went on a beat too long. Sit down, Vivian said finally, quietly. Both of you. This is going to take longer than you'd like. What followed was not a confession so much as a slow unspooling, the careful unraveling of a woman who had clearly rehearsed this moment in some private corner of her mind for years, hoping it would never come, and preparing anyway, because women like Vivian Callaway didn't survive 4 decades at the top of a brutal industry without preparing for every possibility. The Hollow Circle isn't an organization, Dominic, not the way you think of it. It's a council. Old families, mine included, though I imagine that surprises you less than it should, who decided decades ago that certain bloodlines accumulating certain kinds of power was a danger to be managed. Your father was one of the names on a very short list. When you took over and expanded faster than anyone anticipated, you became the next name. And Clara? Clara was collateral. Vivian said it without flinching, and Clara felt the words land somewhere under her sternum like a physical blow. When the council learned you'd fathered a child, the calculus changed entirely. A son isn't a vulnerability you can buy off or threaten quietly. A son is a man's entire future made flesh. The council voted to remove the variable before it could mature into a problem. You voted. Dominic's voice had dropped into something low and lethal. You sat on that council and voted to take my son away from me. I voted to delay you finding out, Dominic. There's a difference, even if you're too furious right now to hear it. Don't. Clara's voice came out raw, shaking with a fury that had been building for 9 years and finally found a target with a face and a name. Don't you dare try to make this sound like mercy. You forged documents. You convinced a terrified 23-year-old that the father of her child had abandoned her. You let me believe a lie for 9 years while my son grew up with a heart condition you were monitoring the entire time. I tried to keep him safe. You tried to keep him controlled. Dominic's hand slammed flat against the desk, hard enough that a framed photograph toppled and cracked against the glass surface. The research facility, the genetic consults you buried, that's not protection, Vivian. That's a cage with good lighting. Vivian's composure finally cracked, just slightly, just enough to show the exhaustion underneath. There were factions within the council who wanted the boy eliminated the moment his existence was confirmed. I am the reason that vote never passed. I am the reason he is alive, Dominic, whatever else you choose to believe about me. Why should I believe anything you say? Because the men who came for him at that bakery 2 nights ago weren't sent by me. Her voice dropped, urgent now, the rehearsed calm finally splintering under real fear. They were sent by a faction I no longer control. A faction that decided containment had failed and elimination was the only remaining option. I have spent the last 48 hours trying to slow them down, and I am telling you now, as plainly as I know how, you have very little time left to get that boy somewhere they cannot reach him. The air in the office went thin. Who, Dominic said, is leading that faction? Vivian's eyes moved just once toward the door of her office, and the motion was so small that Clara almost missed it, except she didn't miss it, because something about the timing, the precision of it, made the back of her neck prickle with a warning her body understood before her mind caught up. The door opened. Marcus stepped through it, the same Marcus who'd worked at Dominic's side for 15 years, the same Marcus who'd handed him the folder with the redacted hospital records, the same Marcus who'd stood beside him on the terrace 2 nights ago and promised quiet, patient revenge. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He didn't need to. The two men flanking him in the doorway, dressed in the same plain dark clothes as the men from the bakery, made that unnecessary. "Marcus," Dominic said, and his voice came out wrong, came out like something breaking very slowly and very completely. "What is this?" "This," Marcus said, "is 15 years of watching you build an empire you never once thought to share, Dominic. 15 years of being the man who handled the bodies and buried the records and made the inconvenient things disappear, while you got to walk into rooms and be called a financial titan." He stepped further into the office, his face arranged in something almost like regret, almost like an apology, except his eyes stayed flat and cold the entire time. "The council didn't recruit me, if that's what you're working out right now. I came to them 4 years ago. Around the time I realized you were never going to make me a partner, no matter how much of myself I poured into protecting your legacy. You knew about Noah the whole time. I knew before you did." Marcus's mouth twisted into something that might have once been a smile in another life, on a different man. "I'm the one who flagged his chart in the first place. I'm the one who made sure those genetic consults never went through, because the results would have confirmed paternity in a way that even a man as willfully blind as you couldn't ignore. I have been managing this situation for 7 years, Dominic, and you have been drinking coffee 3 feet away from the answer every single morning without once asking the right question." The room had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that exists right before something irreversible happens. Clara felt her pulse hammering in her throat, felt Dominic's body go rigid beside her, every muscle coiling. "Where's my son?" he said. Marcus's smile widened, slow and terrible. "That's the part you're going to want to sit down for." He held up a phone, screen angled toward them, and on it was a live video feed, grainy, time-stamped, the corner of a sterile white room Clara didn't recognize. A small figure lay on a hospital bed in the center of the frame, motionless, an IV line taped to one thin arm, monitors blinking soft green numbers beside him. Noah. Not in the guest room 2 hours away where Clara had left him sleeping under armed protection not 40 minutes ago, not safe, not where he was supposed to be. "He's been at the facility since this morning," Marcus said, watching Clara's face come apart in real time with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Your security detail was very good, Dominic. Truly. It just wasn't good enough to stop the man who hired half of them in the first place." The sound that came out of Clara then didn't belong to any version of herself she recognized. Not the terrified 23-year-old who'd run 9 years ago, not the careful, controlled bakery owner who'd built a quiet life out of flour and routine, but something underneath both of those women, something that had been waiting 9 years for the exact moment the last wall fell down. Dominic didn't make a sound at all. He went very still, the kind of stillness that Clara understood now, after 3 days, to be infinitely more dangerous than rage. The stillness of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about loyalty, about family, about exactly how much of himself he was willing to burn to get his son back. "You have 1 hour," Marcus said, pocketing the phone, "to decide whether you're going to come to the facility alone and discuss terms like a reasonable man, or whether you're going to do something reckless and force my hand regarding what happens to that very fragile heart of his. The clock starts now, Dominic. I'd use the time wisely. You're not as good at this as you used to be. Civilization's made you soft. I'd hate for that softness to cost you everything twice in one lifetime." He turned and walked out, his 2 men backing out after him with the unhurried calm of people who knew exactly how thoroughly they'd just won, and the office door clicked shut behind them with a sound that landed in the silence like a verdict. Vivian Calloway, still seated behind her shattered photograph, looked up at Dominic with something that might have been pity. "I tried to warn you he'd turned. I sent 3 messages to your private line this week alone. Encrypted, careful, exactly the kind of warning a man in your position should have recognized. You never read a single one, did you? Too busy drinking coffee in a bakery, pretending you were still capable of being an ordinary man." Dominic didn't answer her. He was already moving toward the door, already reaching for his phone with hands that, for the first time in 3 days, had stopped shaking entirely. Because somewhere in the last 60 seconds, watching his son's small, unconscious body on a stranger's phone screen, the last fragile piece of the man who baked nothing and asked for nothing and disturbed nothing, had finally, completely burned away. What stood in his place now was the thing Harbor Ridge hadn't seen in 9 years, the thing that had once made grown men flinch at the mention of his name in rooms 3 states away. And as he pulled open the office door with Clara half a step behind him, her face white and wrecked and utterly resolved, Dominic Valente spoke into the phone in a voice that belonged entirely to the man he used to be. "Reyes, wake everyone up. We're going to war." The drive north took 90 minutes that felt like 90 years. Clara sat in the back of a black SUV that smelled like leather and gun oil, her hands wrapped so tight around her own knees that her knuckles had gone the color of bone, watching Dominic in the front seat issue instructions into a phone in a voice she didn't recognize, clipped, precise, devoid of every soft edge that 3 years of coffee orders had taught her to expect from him. "Reyes wants confirmation on the east perimeter before we move," he said, not looking back at her. "Thermals showing 6 bodies on the ground floor, 2 more on what used to be the loading dock. Could be more inside. We don't know the floor plan past the lobby." "How do we know he's even still in the building?" Clara's voice cracked on the question, 3 days of terror finally wearing through every wall she had left. "Because Marcus wants a negotiation, not a body to bargain with." Dominic finally turned, and his eyes in the dashboard light looked like something carved out of stone. "He needs Noah alive to control me. The second that stops being true, we lose all our leverage, and so does he. That's the only thing keeping me from putting my fist through this window right now." The facility rose out of the dark like something that had given up pretending to be anything other than what it was. A low, flat compound behind a chain-link fence gone soft with rust. 3 buildings connected by covered walkways, a single guard tower at the northeast corner with a light burning behind grimy glass. Official signage near the gate still read, "Biomedical Research Annex 4. The letters faded, the whole site wearing its decommissioned cover like a threadbare coat. Reyes met them 200 yards out, crouched behind the wheel well of a second SUV with 4 other men Clara didn't recognize, all of them dressed in dark tactical gear that made the whole scene feel like something out of a film rather than her actual life. "East fence has a blind spot in the camera rotation," Reyes said, voice low. 90-second window every 4 minutes. We can get 6 men through clean if we time it right." "I'm not waiting for a window," Dominic said. "Dominic, he has my son inside that building, Reyes. I am not standing in a field doing math while Marcus decides how patient he's feeling tonight." Dominic was already stripping off his suit jacket, rolling his shirt sleeves with hands that moved fast and sure, despite 9 years of boardrooms dulling whatever edge he'd once carried into rooms like this. "Clara stays in the vehicle." "Like hell I do." "Clara, he is my son." She was out of the SUV before anyone could stop her, standing in the wet grass with her jaw set and her eyes burning, the same fury that had put a knife in her hand 3 nights ago, now stripped down to something colder and steadier. "I have spent 7 years being the only person fighting for him. I am not sitting in a car while other people decide whether he lives or dies." Dominic looked at her for a long moment, something passing behind his eyes that wasn't quite approval and wasn't quite fear, but lived somewhere dangerously close to both. "Stay behind me," he said finally. "Every step. I mean it." "Fine. I'm not negotiating on this one, Clara." I said fine. "What?" The first contact came 40 feet inside the fence line, a guard stepping out from behind a maintenance shed with a rifle half raised, and Reyes put him down before the man's mouth had even finished forming a word. A single suppressed shot that cracked through the dark like a snapped branch. Clara flinched hard enough to stumble, Dominic's hand catching her elbow without either of them breaking stride. "Stay low," he said. "Stay close." They moved through the compound in a tight formation, Reyes and 2 men taking point, Dominic and Clara in the center, 2 more men covering the rear, and Clara found herself running on instinct alone, her body doing things her mind hadn't agreed to. Ducking behind a generator housing when gunfire opened up from the second building, pressing herself flat against cold concrete with her heart slamming so hard against her ribs she could feel it in her teeth. The firefight that followed lasted 90 seconds and felt like an hour. Muzzle flashes lit the dark in stuttering bursts, the smell of cordite thick enough to taste, one of Reyes's men going down with a cry that ended in a wet gurgle that Clara would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. Dominic moved through it like something that had been built for exactly this and nothing else. His face a mask of total concentration, putting down 2 more guards with a brutal economy that made Clara's stomach turn, even as some traitor part of her was grateful for every single body that dropped between her son and the men trying to keep them apart. "Clear," Reyes called, voice tight, and they pushed forward into the second building, into a hallway lit by humming fluorescent tubes that buzzed like something dying. "This is wrong," Dominic muttered, scanning the corridor, his weapon held low and ready. "Too easy. Marcus knew we were coming the second we hit that fence line. He's letting us in." "Why would he do that?" "Because he wants me in that building specifically. Because whatever he's planning, it needs me standing in front of him, not storming a perimeter from outside." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Stay sharp." They found the first real resistance at a set of double doors marked Restricted, Archive Wing. 4 guards positioned in a kill box that nearly worked, nearly caught Reyes's team in a crossfire that would have ended things badly if Dominic hadn't seen the angle a half second before anyone else. Throwing his shoulder into Clara and taking them both down behind an overturned gurney as the first burst of gunfire chewed through the wall where she'd been standing. "You good?" he asked, his weight pressed against her, his breath coming hard and fast against her ear, both of them flat on a floor sticky with something Clara didn't want to identify. "I'm good. Go." He didn't go. Not yet. For 1/2 second, with bullets cracking overhead and his son's life hanging somewhere in the building around them, Dominic looked at Clara's face, inches from his, terrified and furious and more alive than he'd seen her in 9 years. And something passed between them that had nothing to do with the war happening 6 feet away. Then the moment broke. Because moments like that didn't get to last in a place like this, and Dominic rolled up over the gurney and put down the remaining guards with 4 shots that left the corridor in a ringing, smoking silence. "Move," he said, hauling Clara up by the arm. "Now, while we have it." The archive room sat at the end of the wing, a steel door standing half open, light spilling out in a long yellow rectangle across the corridor floor. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched back into shadow, and at a long steel table in the center of the room stood Marcus, alone, hands clasped behind his back like a man waiting for a meeting that was running exactly on schedule. "You made good time," Marcus said, not turning around. "Faster than I expected, honestly. The old instincts really never do leave a man like you, do they?" "Where is he?" "Patience." Marcus finally turned, and his face in the harsh fluorescent light looked older than it had 3 days ago, the careful mask finally falling away to show something tired and bitter underneath. "We're going to have a conversation first." "I'm done having conversations." Dominic's weapon came up, leveled at Marcus's chest. His hand rock steady despite every instinct in his body screaming to close the distance and finish this with his hands instead. "Where is my son?" 2 floors down, sub-basement. There's a code on the elevator panel that changes every 6 hours, and I am the only person currently breathing who knows what it is right now. Marcus's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "So I'd suggest we keep talking, Dominic, unless you'd like to spend the next several hours trying to hack a 30-year-old security system while his oxygen levels keep dropping." "His oxygen?" Clara's voice tore out of her, raw and panicked. "What is wrong with him? What have you done to him?" "Nothing that wasn't already wrong, Mrs. Whitmore. Your son's congenital defect is real." "I didn't fabricate that part. I simply made certain the specialists who could have corrected it years ago never got the chance to look at his full genetic profile. A sealed file is a useful thing. It lets a condition progress exactly as slowly or as quickly as someone with the right access decides it should." The words landed in the room like a physical blow, and Clara felt something in her chest crack clean in half. 7 years of hospital visits. 7 years of watching her son's breath catch and stutter. 7 years of being told by doctors that nothing more could be done. And all of it, had been a leash held by a man standing 20 feet away with his hands clasped calmly behind his back. "You're going to die in this room," Dominic said, voice dropped into something that didn't sound human anymore, something Clara had only heard once before. In the bakery, 3 strikes and a man crumpling against a counter. I'm going to make absolutely certain of that. The only question left is how slowly. Threats are cheap, Dominic. You taught me that yourself 15 years ago, the first week I worked for you. Marcus's hand drifted, slow and deliberate, toward the inside of his jacket, and every man in the doorway behind Dominic tensed in unison. What I want is considerably more straightforward. The trust. Full control, signed over before sunrise. Every asset, every shell, every account you've spent 9 years building back from nothing. In exchange, you get the boy, you get the woman, and you get to disappear somewhere quiet and pretend the last 15 years of my life spent serving yours never happened. And if I refuse? Then his oxygen levels finish dropping on their own, on a live stream I've already set up to your private number, and you get to watch in real time exactly how much your pride was worth. Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger, his whole body coiled with a violence that wanted nothing more than to end this in the next half second, consequences be damned. And it was Clara's hand on his arm, trembling but firm, that stopped him. Don't, she said quietly. He needs to live long enough to give us that code. You kill him now. We lose Noah forever. Every muscle in Dominic's body screamed against her logic and obeyed it anyway, the gun lowering an inch, his breath coming ragged through clenched teeth. Smart woman, Marcus said. Always was. Pity the council didn't see fit to recruit you 9 years ago instead of erasing you. Give me the code, Dominic said. Sign the transfer first. There's no transfer device in this building, Marcus, and we both know it. You want this done remotely, through council, through channels that take days to clear, even with every favor I'm owed. Dominic took one slow step forward, weapon still raised, his voice gone flat and final. So here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to give me that code right now, because some small, cowardly part of you already knows you're not walking out of this building either way, and the only thing left for you to decide is whether you die having done one decent thing in the last decade of your miserable life. Marcus's composure flickered, just slightly, just enough for Clara to see the fear underneath 15 years of careful, patient betrayal. You'd kill me even if I gave it to you. Probably. Dominic didn't blink. But if you don't give it to me, I promise you, the dying part is going to take considerably longer. The silence stretched, thin and electric, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Somewhere far below them in the bowels of the building, a small boy's heart monitor ticking through numbers that were sliding, slowly, in the wrong direction. And Marcus's hand, still hovering near his jacket, finally moved, not toward a weapon, but toward an inside pocket, fingers closing around something small and rectangular. 47729, he said, voice gone hollow. Sub-basement 2. Elevators at the end of this hall. Dominic didn't lower his weapon. Reyes, get them moving. Now. But Marcus wasn't finished, and something in the set of his shoulders, in the sudden strange calm settling over his face, made the back of Clara's neck crawl with a warning a half second before he spoke again. There's one more thing you should probably know before you go charging down there playing hero. His hand finished its motion, pulling free not a weapon, but a small black detonator, thumb already resting against the trigger with the casual ease of a man who had planned this exact moment for longer than any of them realized. The sub-basement isn't just where your son is. It's also wired to come down the second anyone tries to leave with him who isn't me. The detonator sat in Marcus's palm like something alive, his thumb resting light against the trigger. And for 3 full seconds, nobody in that archive room breathed. You're bluffing, Dominic said, but his voice had lost its certainty, and Marcus heard it too, because the bitter, almost smile on his face widened just slightly. Am I? I had 4 years to plan this, Dominic. You think I didn't account for the version of tonight where you walked in here and pointed a gun at my chest? I've watched you do that to better men than me. He took one slow step backward toward the door behind him, putting distance between himself and the family he'd spent 7 years quietly destroying. Here's how this actually ends. I walk out of this building. Nobody follows me. You take the elevator down, you get your boy, and the second I'm clear of the property, I disarm it remotely. You chase me, or you try anything heroic with your security team out there, and I promise you that sub-basement becomes a tomb before you've taken 10 steps toward it. And we're supposed to just trust you. You're supposed to do the math. Same as I did. Marcus was almost to the door now, his eyes flicking once to Clara, something almost like an apology in them before the coldness swallowed it back down. You have a son to save. I have nothing left to lose. Those two facts mean I hold every card in this room, whether you like the arithmetic or not. He was 3 steps from the door when Reyes, positioned just outside the frame where Marcus hadn't accounted for him, moved. It happened too fast for Clara to process in any order that made sense afterward. A blur of motion, a grunt of impact, Marcus's wrist snapping back against the doorframe hard enough that the detonator clattered free and skittered across the concrete floor, spinning to a stop inches from Dominic's boot. Marcus screamed something furious and wordless, lunging for it, and Dominic crossed the distance in 2 strides and brought the butt of his weapon down across the back of Marcus's skull with a crack that ended the fight before it had properly begun. Marcus crumpled to the floor and didn't move again. Reyes was breathing hard, blood running from a split lip where Marcus's elbow had caught him. Detonator's a dummy, he said, snatching it up, turning it over in his hands. No charge, no wires. He never planted explosives down there at all. It's a bluff, just like you said. I said I thought it was a bluff. Dominic's voice came out unsteady for the first time all night, the adrenaline finally cracking through 9 years of practice control. I wasn't sure. I gambled my son's life on a guess about a man I used to trust completely. You gambled right. Reyes kicked Marcus's unconscious body onto its back, zip-tying his wrists with the same brutal efficiency Dominic had used on the men at the bakery 3 nights ago. Go. We've got him. Get your boy. The elevator down to the sub-basement took 11 seconds and felt like 11 years. Clara's hand locked around Dominic so tight her nails were leaving crescents in his skin, neither of them speaking, both of them staring at the numbers ticking down above the door like the digits themselves might decide whether Noah was still breathing on the other side. The doors opened onto a corridor lit in sterile white, and at the end of it, through a wide observation window, Clara saw him. Noah lay on a hospital bed in a small, isolated room, motionless, an IV taped to his thin arm, a monitor beside him tracking numbers that made Clara's stomach drop the second she understood what she was looking at. His oxygen saturation dropping, slow but steady, the alarm not yet tripped but close. Close enough that the nurse stationed in the corner of the room, the last of Marcus's people, abandoned now, hands raised the moment Dominic burst through the door with his weapon raised, flinched back against the wall without needing to be told twice. Out, Dominic said, and the man didn't argue, didn't even look back, just bolted past them down the corridor and was gone. Clara was at Noah's side before the door had finished swinging shut, both hands cupping his small face, her own breath coming in ragged sobs she didn't have the strength left to suppress. Noah, baby, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered, slow, drugged, but they opened, and when they found her face, something in his slack expression loosened with relief, so total it broke something open in her chest all over again. Mom, he whispered, voice thin and dry. It hurts. My chest. I know, baby. I know. We're getting you out of here right now. Dominic was already at the monitor, scanning numbers he didn't fully understand but recognized the shape of fear and regardless, his hands hovering uselessly over his son's small body, like he was afraid that touching him might break something that was already broken enough. His oxygen's dropping. We need a hospital now, not in 20 minutes now. Reyes already called it in, came a voice from the doorway, one of Dominic's men, breathless from the stairs. Medevac's 11 minutes out. They're prepping a cardiac team at St. Lucia General the second we land. 11 minutes. Claire had spent the last 3 days learning exactly how long 11 minutes could feel when her son's life sat balanced on the other side of them, and she gripped Noah's small hand in both of hers and didn't let go. Not once, not for a single second of the longest 11 minutes of her entire life. Dominic knelt on the other side of the bed, and for the first time since the bakery 3 nights ago, Clara watched him simply be still. No calculation in his face, no strategy, nothing but a father looking at his son for what felt to him like the very first time, even though it was really the 1,000th, every single one of those mornings behind a counter finally collapsing into this one true moment. Hey, Dominic said, voice cracking. Hey, buddy, I'm Dominic. Noah's glassy eyes found him, confused, exhausted. "You're the coffee guy." A broken sound that was half a laugh and half a sob tore out of Dominic's chest. "Yeah, I'm the coffee guy." "Why are you here?" Dominic looked up at Clara, a question in his face that wasn't really a question at all, more a request for permission he already knew somehow she was finally ready to give. "Because," Clara said softly, brushing the damp hair back from her son's forehead, "he's your dad, baby. He's been your dad this whole time. We just didn't know how to find each other." Noah's brow furrowed, the information too large and strange to fully land through the haze of sedation and fear, but his small hand reached out anyway, instinctive, and found Dominic's fingers, closing around them with a grip that had no idea yet how much weight it was carrying, how much history, how much 9 years of separation had finally, irreversibly come undone. "Okay," Noah whispered, eyes already drifting closed again. "Okay." It was the simplest word in the world, and it nearly destroyed both of his parents where they knelt. What? The surgery, when it finally happened 3 weeks later, took 6 hours and 17 minutes, and Clara spent every one of them in a waiting room at St. Lucia General with Dominic's hand wrapped around hers, neither of them saying much, both of them watching the clock on the wall tick forward with the particular helplessness of people who had run out of anything useful to do. The genetic consult Marcus had spent 7 years burying finally happened the week before, and it had confirmed what the cardiac team suspected. Noah's condition was real, congenital, but treatable in a way that should have been addressed years earlier. The kind of straightforward surgical correction that any competent specialist would have recommended immediately if his file had ever been allowed to reach one. 7 years of unnecessary fear. 7 years of a boy growing up believing his heart was something fragile and broken, when really it had simply been left, deliberately, in the dark. "I keep thinking about all those mornings," Dominic said quietly, somewhere around hour 4, his eyes fixed on the closed double doors at the end of the hallway. Sitting in that corner table, watching him run past with his orange juice. "I had a son 15 feet away from me for 3 years, and I told myself I was imagining it, because the alternative was too enormous to hold." "You weren't imagining it." "No, I wasn't." His thumb traced slow, absent circles against the back of her hand. "I keep trying to figure out how to forgive myself for not pushing harder, for drinking my coffee and saying 11 words and walking out the door every single morning instead of asking the one question that would have changed everything." "You were protecting yourself." Clara's voice was quiet, worn thin by 3 weeks of fear that had only just begun to loosen its grip on her chest. "I understand that better than anyone. I spent 9 years building a life out of not asking questions because the answers felt like they might kill me if I let them in." "Does it feel like that now, letting them in?" She considered the question honestly, the way she'd learned to consider everything since the night her bakery's front door had exploded inward and the careful architecture of her quiet life had come apart in a single, irreversible night. "It feels like waking up after a very long sleep," she said finally. "Everything's too bright at first, but you remember, slowly, what it felt like to actually be awake." The doors at the end of the hallway opened at 11 minutes past hour 6, and the surgeon who walked through them was already pulling off her mask, already smiling in the careful, professional way doctors smile when they're about to deliver good news but haven't quite let themselves celebrate it yet. "He's stable," she said. "Repair went exactly the way we hoped. Recovery is going to take time, but barring complications, your son is going to grow up with a completely normal, healthy heart." Clara's legs gave out before she'd fully processed the words, Dominic catching her against his chest, both of them sinking onto a waiting room bench together with 9 years of grief and 3 weeks of terror, finally breaking loose all at once, neither one of them embarrassed enough to hide it from the other anymore. The Hollow Circle didn't survive the month that followed. With Vivian Calloway's testimony, given, in the end, not out of loyalty, but out of the particular self-preservation of a woman who recognized which way the tide had finally turned, and the financial records Reyes' team extracted from 6 layers of shell companies before the council had time to burn them, federal prosecutors built a case that took apart the organization piece by piece. Hospital executives who'd accepted payment to falsify records, politicians who'd looked away from sealed adoption files and forged paternity records for the right price, A network that had spent decades quietly managing which children grew up to inherit which fortunes, which secrets, which loyalties. All of it finally exposed under lights too bright to survive in. Marcus took a plea deal 8 months later, trading testimony against the remaining council members for a sentence that still left him an old man before he ever walked free again. Dominic didn't attend the sentencing. He'd considered it in the early weeks, some old hunger for closure pulling at him every time Marcus's name came up in a legal brief. But somewhere in the long, quiet recovery of his son's first healthy summer, that hunger had simply stopped mattering as much as the alternative, which was being present for every single ordinary moment he'd nearly lost the chance to have. The bakery reopened in March, the broken front window replaced, the cracked pastry case repaired, the bullet hole in the ceiling patched and painted over so thoroughly that no one walking in off the street would ever guess what had happened there. Clara had thought about moving, somewhere with no memory baked into the floorboards. But in the end, she'd decided that the bakery wasn't the thing that needed healing. She was. And healing, she'd learned over 9 strange, difficult years, didn't usually happen by running from a place. It happened by staying and making something new inside it. Dominic still came every morning. He still ordered the same thing, black coffee, almond pastry, but he didn't sit at the corner table anymore, didn't hide behind a newspaper he never read. Now he came around behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, learning the particular rhythm of kneading dough under Clara's patient, occasionally exasperated instruction. His expensive watch traded most mornings for flour dust up to his elbows. "You're doing it wrong," Clara told him one gray Tuesday in April, watching him fold the dough with the same brutal efficiency he brought to everything else in his life. "I'm doing it the way you showed me." "You're doing it like you're trying to win a fight against the dough." "Old habits." He looked up at her, and something in his face had softened permanently over the past year. The hard edges worn down not by time, but by the particular erosion of getting to come home to something every single day instead of guarding it from a distance. "Show me again." She did, her hands over his, guiding the motion, slower, gentler, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The ordinary intimacy of the gesture carrying a weight that 9 years of separation had taught them both never to take for granted again. Noah burst through the back curtain at exactly 7:15, the way he did every morning now, his color high and healthy in a way that still occasionally caught Clara off guard with how much she'd taken his fragility for granted as a permanent fact of life rather than a wound that could, eventually, actually heal. "Dad, can I work the register today?" The words still did something to Dominic every single time. Dad, easy now, unguarded, nothing like the careful confession he'd choked out in a guest room a year ago. "Ask your mother." "Mom, can I—" "You know the rules, customers first, register second, and if you give Mrs. Okafor the wrong change again, I'm benching you for a week." That was one time. It was 3 times. Noah grinned, that crooked smile that still wasn't quite Clara's, and wasn't quite Dominic's, but was entirely, unmistakably, his own, and darted toward the front of the shop as the bell over the door chimed and the morning's first customers began filing in out of the cold. Dominic watched him go, flour still dusting his forearms, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for the better part of a decade. Not relief, exactly, and not quite peace, but something adjacent to both. Something he'd stopped believing he had any right to expect from a life that had cost him and everyone he loved so much to finally arrive at. "Hey," Clara said, nudging his shoulder with hers. "You're doing the thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you go somewhere else in your head and your face gets that look like you're about to apologize to the whole world." He huffed something that might have been a laugh. "Force of habit." "Stop it. We're not doing penance anymore, Dominic. We did our penance. We're past it." He looked at her. Really looked. The way he'd learned to over the past year, without calculation, without distance, without a counter and a register standing safely between them. And reached for her hand the way he had every morning since the hospital, slow and certain, like a man who'd finally stopped being afraid that reaching for something good might be the thing that made it disappear. Outside, the gray October sky had begun, finally, to break apart. Thin lines of morning light spilling through the clouds and across the bakery's front window, catching the flour dust still hanging in the air and turning it, for just a moment, into something that looked almost like gold. Noah's laughter rang out from the front counter, bright and easy and utterly unburdened, the laughter of a boy who would grow up never needing to know how close he'd come to losing the chance to laugh like that at all. Clara leaned her head against Dominic's shoulder, his arms settling around her with the unhurried comfort of 9 years finally, completely forgiven, and together they watched their son hand a customer the wrong change for the 4th time that month, and neither of them said a single word about it, because some mornings, the ordinary ones, the safe ones, the ones that didn't cost anyone anything at all, those were the only mornings either of them had ever actually wanted, and now, finally, impossibly, they had nothing left to do but live inside them.